Well, hello, readers. I am so glad that you are here because I am so excited to introduce you to a wonderful friend of mine, Sharon Hinck. So, welcome, Sharon. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And we are going to be talking about this awesome book, Dream of Kings. The cover is so amazing. I just love the blues and the golds. And when I got it in the mail, I think I gasped when I opened the box and saw it there. And the writing is just as beautiful, I will say, as the
Oh,
cover. So there you go.
thanks. I know when I saw the cover, I was like, oh no, now I have a lot to live up to.
It is kind of that feeling, huh? Like,
Yeah.
oh wow, this is like real, even though you've done it many times before. So for those who may not be familiar with you, why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I have been married to my wonderful husband, who I wouldn't be writing if it wasn't for him. He's so supportive and terrific. And so we've been married 43 years. We were high school
Wow.
sweethearts. And we have 4 grown-up kids all scattered around the country doing their own things, and we're very proud of them. And then we have 3 grandchildren who, of
Yay.
course, are the most amazing.
The
I
best, the best.
Yes, I'm the typical obnoxious grandma. I think my grandchildren are just amazing. So, that fills and fuels my heart a lot. And I was a church youth worker and was the artistic director of a Christian dance company for 10
Oh
years
wow.
and did some teaching of crafts and was a church organist. And I joke that one day I'll figure out what to be when I grow up.
Yeah.
I keep zigzagging through life, but I've always loved to write. And when I was in grad school, one of my professors took one of my papers, handed it back to me all marked up with red ink, but said, submit this to this magazine. And I went, really? Because I never thought, I mean, to me, published writers are just like, oh, and
That's so funny.
yeah, I didn't think I could do that. So I sent it in and it got accepted. And that kind of broke the ice for me. And I wrote
Mhm.
for a while for magazines and book compilations. And then, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago, started my first novel, The Restorer, but it
Yeah.
wasn't the first novel to be published. But that's where I kind of took off, started going to writers' conferences, um, and then eventually was published with Bethany House, The Secret Life of Becky Miller, and some other women's fiction. And so that's how I got started in writing novels.
I love it so much. Okay, I'm so excited to talk about this book, and I want to know where you got the idea for it. And generally it's just it's about a woman who can read dreams or interpret dreams, see dreams and interpret them. And it's this. I love the world you created. It's this. You why don't you tell it better than I can? But the world you created is fascinating. The guild you created. There's intrigue. There's danger. Right away within the first 3 or 4 chapters, she's in trouble. There's problems. She gets taken away. I mean, I don't want to give away too much, but why don't you just, in a better way than I just described it, explain what the book is about?
Well, first, I had started to notice as I was thinking of a new story idea, I had noticed how many retelling or reimagining of familiar stories are popular
Mhm.
these days,
Yes.
whether it's Peter Pan or Alice in Wonderland or Wizard of Oz, all these retellings. And when I wrote The Restore, I did kind of a reimagining of the story of Deborah.
Yeah.
That's kind of was my jumping off point, and then it went its own direction. So I thought, what is another one of my favorite biblical stories that could kind
Mm.
of just be the jumping off point, the reimagining? And I also thought of Francine Rivers' book, Redeeming Love.
Yes.
Such a favorite of so many readers, where she reinterprets a familiar biblical story but puts it in a completely new setting. So I
Mhm.
created a completely new setting, kind of influenced by the Medici, the kind of the corrupt political courts, where there's danger of poison and
Yes.
there's all the kind of backbiting and these guilds jockeying for power. And she is favored by the High Lord of Norgard, but then things go wrong,
Mhm.
which is kind
Yes.
of how every story starts. Then
Yes.
things go wrong, and then they go more wrong. And So I
And then the people that are doing her wrong, you're like, how could you be the one? It's just like, stabbed to the heart. I
yeah,
like, I'm listening. I started reading it. Then I got the audiobook because I could go faster with an audiobook because I could listen when I'm making
yep.
dinner and cleaning the house. So I have the hardback and I have the audiobook. But I like actually paused and like, no, the betrayal. And I had to I rewinded it to listen again
Did
to
that
make
happen
sure,
to
anyway,
you
I
on
don't
the
want to give
husband?
anything away, but it's just like, oh, so good.
Well, and I was springboarding off various dreamers in scripture, and
Yeah.
there's more than one. I mean, everybody knows the most famous. He even got a Broadway musical
Yes.
with his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Yes.
So there's but it's actually Daniel who is asked by the king, I can't remember what I dreamed, so tell me what I dreamed and
Yes.
what, which is kind of a big ask.
Yeah.
It's
I
one
want you
thing,
to tell me. And even the people, the other people that the king was asking said, how can you tell us the dream and then we'll tell you what it means? They're
yeah.
like, this is impossible. Yeah.
So I kind of took that as, there's this whole guild of dream tellers, and that's their job. And they have that gift of, talking with someone and being able to tell them the dream that they couldn't remember. They know that they woke up unsettled, and then they go to a dream teller who says, okay, this is what you dreamed. This is what it probably means. So I used that hook to get the story going. And because also of the tie-in with like the story of Joseph, but set in this whole other kind of world and setting, I figured the theme would be about forgiveness because that's
Mm,
Joseph's theme. But as I was writing, which often happens to me, the theme shifted. And
yeah.
so there's some really different themes. And as I was writing it, was going through a lot of loss. It was my pandemic book, so a lot of
Mm,
people I knew were going through
yeah.
loss of loved ones, loss of jobs, loss of health. And so that theme of loss began to weave its way through. And I thought, oh, this will be depressing. But it surprised me because there was so much joy and so much beauty in seeing how God behind the scenes was weaving purpose in everything that happens to poor Jolan. Uh,
Yes.
so that's
I
kind of
love it.
that was what triggered me diving into the story and then setting it in a completely other world, because sometimes when we look at a familiar thing but set it in a completely different place, we get new insights
Yeah.
or learn new things. So that was really fun.
And it's so fun to have like, one of the guilds, they have like these animals that hunt with them. And I'm like, I was in the car, my daughter, I was listening to the book, I was taking her to an appointment. I'm like, he has a lioness that hunts with him. Like just that kind of thing. And then like one point it mentions like the three moons. And it's just so fun when you kind of like, in addition to the story and the characters and kind of the problems, there's this world that you're learning more and more. It's like this peeling back of this world where at first you think it's kind of like yours, but then you're like, oh, it's not. Oh, this is cool. Oh, this is another element. So that is so fun. So I mean, do you love that world building part where you're just
I
building out these things and layering it in?
It's one of the joys of writing fantasy is you just can create. I mean, the hard part is giving it continuity within that
Yeah.
story world,
Yeah.
so that if you create something that it makes sense and it also that it fits the theme. Like when I wrote the Dancing Realms books, I used this floating island that moved on the currents, and it wasn't just to make something interesting and different. It really was symbolic of this
Mm,
theme of, do we trust God to guide us in his currents, or do we try to stand still and resist him? And
yeah.
so just what happened geographically was symbolic for what was happening spiritually. So I love when the story world, it's fun, but then that it also has some layers that are symbolic to some of the themes and the meaning and the characterizations. But yeah, that's such a fun part.
Yeah, and
And
it's so fun just, like, reading it and discovering this new world. It was just, it's been a blast.
good.
And I'm not done with the book yet, so I just love, like, all these little things that are woven in there is so fascinating, and I want you to talk more about that spiritual element because right away through the story, the the involvement of a god, so this described differently in the book, but is very real. Like he's caring for them. And then there's all these human factions that are fighting, but God is still through these dreams is leading and protecting and providing. So tell a little bit about that element, because sometimes people say like, oh, it's fantasy, like it's just all this other world stuff. But I love, even in fantasy, you can weave in the nature of God in these other worlds.
Yeah, I think in all my books, God is a character in all the books, and he interacts really tangibly and vividly with the protagonist of the story. And
Mhm.
that, to me, those are the favorite scenes to write.
Yeah.
And just like all of us humans, when we suffer, we have a lot of questions for God, and so
Mhm.
does Joanne. And so I
Yeah.
try to let her be raw and real as different things happen, and question things, but she also learns things about God's nature throughout the book. And I think one thing that was interesting about her that I related to is she was a good girl. She was
Yeah.
like, she to serve her people. She served the provider, which is their name for
Yes.
God. And late in the book, I don't think this is a spoiler at all, but there's a different character who says to her, because she says something to the effect of, I did everything right. I did what I was supposed to do. And the other character confronts her with this, oh, so you think he owes you now? And she says,
Mm.
that's not what I'm saying. And he says, isn't it? And she's confronted with, oh, I was doing all this stuff, but I was doing it as kind of a trade with God.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't accepting his love and just loving him back. It was, even if just subconsciously, there was a little bit of that. Um, Now he owes me because I did the good things.
I think so many times in life we do that though, as Christians. Like, I'm doing
Mhm.
what you told me to do. Why are these hard things? Why did I lose this person? Why is this happening? Why did the financial market crash? Like, we're doing all the things we're supposed to be doing, God. You should be making this easier for us. And I think we can get in that mentality that if we're doing the right things, then everything should work out. And then when it doesn't, people often have a crisis of faith, which it sounds like you're reflecting that in this
Yeah.
novel.
Yeah. And it's wonderful. Sometimes there's a lot of things we won't see till heaven. Then we'll find out. I think it'll be fun to sit down like with a scrapbook of our lives with God and say, okay, I was really upset with you back in this chapter. What was going on? And we'll learn some of the purposes, and we'll say, oh, it was worth it because
Mhm.
look what he did through it. And I think that's one of the themes in Dream of Kings too, without giving away the point of where she ends up. But she begins to see, she is blessed with getting a glimpse of why some of the things happened,
Yeah,
and
so
that we
good.
have good purposes.
I love that. Thank you, Brooke. Brooke said, loving your excited, smiling faces. Thank you for that. Terry says, this sounds so fun. I wanted to get it, but I had no idea what it was about. Beautiful cover. Yeah, I think I'll ask it for my birthday. I want to know more. Terry, you will not be disappointed. Sharon is a wonderful writer, and so I'm just loving it. And it's one of those books like right from the beginning. There's just the writing's beautiful, by the way, but there's just enough intrigue that you just are immediately caring for this person getting pulled along. And then the fantasy element is fascinating because you're like, how does this dream thing work? And then as you go on, you see she's just taken into a whole nother element. We will go, I don't want to give too much away, it's so hard,
It's
but
hard to talk about without spoilers. I know, I know.
but it's worth it. So
It's
Terry, all that to say, you will not be disappointed.
And what's fun for me is I'm kind of a discovery writer. I don't heavily outline. I know kind of the arc of where I want to go and some crisis moments and things, but I start out with a character and a story question and follow the character. And so as she interacts with her environment, that's when I learn about it. So
Mhm.
I don't sit down and make up all the details of the foods and the animals and the weather and the I just sort of discover it as she does, and
That's so cool.
sometimes things happen. There was a scene kind of midway through the book where something I did not intend to have happen, where she's in a meeting with the king, and there's somebody else in there, and she looks at that somebody else, and that somebody else looks at her, and I went, "Oh, no," because I saw little threads of romance popping up that I totally did not intend to have happen. And they looked at each other and I went, oh no. And I could tell where it was going to go. And so they took over, but it ended up being really lovely. So I don't want to
love that. And I think like some writers are more like seat of the pants where they don't really know what's going on. And some have plots. And I think even I do a lot of plotting. But
which is
even in the middle, yeah. And even in the middle of
I wish I could more.
Oh yeah. But even in the middle of it, like I'll say, okay, there's gonna be a knock at the door and this is gonna happen, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll open the door. I'm like, it's someone else there. And I'm like, what are they doing there? So I think even in our plots, which is just, I mean, evidence of God's creative nature in our minds, even if we think we know where we're going, or we think we have an idea of the story, or we're working on it, and it's all those things will just pop in, just shows that God is like continuing to work in our minds to like weave these stories. Where I know I've never had a book completely turn out like I thought it would, and I'm sure you didn't either. It's so much fun for us as writers to get to reveal to us in the process of writing.
Yeah. I love that God multitasks. I love that while we're working on writing a book that we hope will be a blessing to readers, he's working on us.
Yes.
He's working on our hearts. He's steering the direction of stories. I always feel like he has me living the themes of my stories as I'm writing them, or somehow what I'm living is reflected in the stories with these fictional characters. I'm not sure. It's the back and forth of that, but yeah.
That's the joy in the journey that, I'll say, yes, I'm glad you're enjoying the book, but really, I think I got the most out of it in the writing process.
Oh, it's true.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. So, okay. So Dream of Kings is a standalone book.
Yep.
So for some people that say, I don't want to
start a series,
it's not done yet, you don't have to worry about it. It's all done. It's all here. Yep. So,
and check it out. If you take off the book jacket, look at what they did.
What?
Gold embossing inside. It's gorgeous.
I didn't even know that.
That's why I tell people, take off the jacket just to peek. Because
it's so cool. Look at how cool yes.
Oh, isn't it cool?
Oh my goodness. They do such a good job. And this is Enclave Publishing, which it's so funny because I did not read fantasy, sci-fi, any of those books until I went to a Railmakers conference with my son, because I'm going to encourage and support my son. And then I'm like, what are these books? What's going on? I start reading them and I'm like in love with them. And then I'm discovering new authors. And now I probably read more Enclave than anything else. So you guys have brought me to your side. And Steve Lobby, when I was there at the conference, he's like, come to the dark side. Well, I don't know if it's the dark side, but I'm fully over there.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So fun. Okay, so this is a standalone. I would love for you to share maybe some of your other books and series that you've done that are already out there so that readers can check out some of those too.
My most recent series is called the Dancing Realms series. And because I was a choreographer and ballet teacher and dancer for many, many years, my agent suggested, he said, you've never drawn from your life as a dancer in your books. And I said, well, that was on purpose because I love dance so much. I'm scared it would overpower the book. I would just write about dance and people would be bored. But he challenged me to give it a try. So I wrote Hidden Current, which is book 1 of the Dancing Realms series. Very nervous about it, but it turned out pretty good. It won a Chris Award.
Yes.
So that was such a gift because I was so nervous about it. And then book 2, Forsaken Island, and then book 3, Windward Shore. And all 3 are available in paperback. And there's some hardcovers left. I think Hidden Current hardcovers are gone now, but the paperbacks, the ebooks are all available. And that series was about a dancer who spent all her life training to audition to join the Order. And the Order is the dancers that control the movements of the island that they live on. And it's a world that has forgotten there was ever a maker.
Oh, wow.
He uncovers the truth, the dark secrets of the Order, and escapes. And that's all pretty early on, so I don't think that gives away too much. And then ends up encountering the Maker and beginning to bring truth to her people all across her island. And um, kind of inspired by that verse in the Bible where they find the book of the law that had been lost,
Yes.
which is such a heartbreaking verse. It's exciting. It's like they found it and now they're all repenting and they're all going to follow God again. It's wonderful, but it's also heartbreaking because they had literally
They
lost
lost it. Yeah.
they lost their knowledge of God all those years. So
Yeah.
that was
So
kind of my
good.
jumping off point for that series.
I love
And
it. Yeah, Patrice said, Dancing Realms and Sword of the Lyric are both such wonderful series.
oh, thanks, Patrice. Yeah, it's the Sort of Lyric series. Restorer was my first novel, not the first that got published, but the first that I wrote. And then I wrote 3 more in the series. So there's 4 Sort of Lyric books. And that was a middle American soccer mom who gets pulled through a portal into another world that's waiting for a promised restorer. And she discovers it's her. And again, inspired by the story of Deborah in the book of Judges, where
Yeah.
a mother in Israel
Yes.
goes into battle when the leaders were too scared to do it and defends her people. So that was the inspiration of those stories, and I love those. And those are also still in print with Enclave. So
Yeah. And what I love just hearing all this, like, would you say most of your books start with that either that nugget of scripture or that biblical story, and then you're like, "Ooh, there's something more here," and just start like, going and digging into it?
exactly. And how can I look at it from a new angle so that maybe we can glean some meaning from it in a new, fresh way that sometimes the biblical stories we're so familiar with, some of us that
Mhm.
grew up in the church and we've heard them, we've seen the flannel graphs of them, and we
Yeah.
think we know them, and they sometimes don't really hit us deep in the heart. And when we come at it, the story from a new direction, sometimes we get some new insights. So
Yeah. I love
fun
it so much.
fun stories. I mean, with fantasy, you can have sword fights, and you can have horses riding into battle, and you can have strange creatures, flying sea creatures that you can ride on. And I mean, it's fun.
So did you grow up loving fantasy and loving that type of books? Yeah.
Yeah. When I started writing, they give you the advice, look at your bookshelves and see what
Mhm.
genre you read the most. And that's what you should write because that's what you love and are drawn to. And that didn't help me at all because I had every
Yeah.
genre on my shelves.
Yes.
But the ones that impacted me so that I still think about scenes today that I read in my childhood, C.S. Lewis, Madeline L'Engle, Calvin Miller, Stephen Lawhead. So I decided to go that direction as I began writing and go with fantasy because it just had the deepest impact on me.
Yeah, and it's so good because, like we've read the Chronicles of Narnia many times with our kids, and every time it's just like God points out something new. We just read for this homeschool year, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the Magician's Nephew, and there'd be times I'd be reading out loud, and it was like, oh, this is such a beautiful passage. It just hit me straight to the heart, like God's message to me through the lion's mouth or through whatever the situation. I'm like, these are such timeless truths. And there's fawns and lions and witches, like all these things. But it's just amazing. I'm like, did you just hear that, kids? And they're like, uh but it is those layers that
Right.
just so impactful. There's that, the general story, but then the layers,
Yeah.
that make it
Well,
really.
and like with Dream of Kings, I wrote it so that people who like just a rollicking adventure with a
Yeah,
little romance and it kind of reads a little bit like a historical as far as the kingdom building and the national conflicts and stuff.
yes,
But for people who are aware of some of the Old Testament stories, and
mhm,
kind of like little Easter eggs you can find. You can say, "Ooh, that's kind of like what happened to this character," or "Ooh, this
yeah,
happened in this biblical story." And there's just these little things that are extra fun. So there's some layers to it, but you don't need to know that. And
yeah,
I feel like my fantasy novels are like safe to give your non-Christian friends, that
yes,
they're not gonna feel overwhelmed or preached at or whatever. They're just fun stories, but there's those levels.
yeah, so good. And I love it because now, I could totally this could be total read out loud that I could do with my homeschool. Like, my kids would be fascinated by it. My daughter in the car with me the other day was fascinated by it. My husband's gonna love it. Like, so a book, I think people think, it's really hard to find a book that the whole family would enjoy. Ta-da! Here we go. I think this is definitely one I would have no problem reading out loud to my youngest, just turned 12. I mean, no problem. He would just enjoy it. He would be interested in it. There's really cool things going on. So I love that it's so rich in writing, but it's like there's enough action and things going on that someone's not going to get bored with it at all. They're going to be like, what's going to happen next? I got to keep going. Like me, my mom's visiting. I'm making dinner. She's in there with me. I'm like, I just got to listen to my audiobook for a little bit more. Sorry to ignore you for 15 minutes while I'm chopping up these vegetables, but I got to find out what happens.
Such a bad influence keeping you away from spending time with your mom.
I know. Well, I'm gonna go spend time with her in a minute after this. So, oh, this is so good. Okay, so one of the things that readers love hearing is recommendations for who they should read next. So, what recommendations do you have for authors that we should be checking out?
Um, I'm in a writers group, so a lot of the reading I've done lately has been manuscripts of their work. They're all published
Yeah.
writers, and I highly recommend Shauna Schrader, who writes for Enclave. She wrote an amazing fantasy, kind of fairy tale-ish type story called Beast about a feral child.
Mm.
Just heartfelt story. It's amazing. And then she wrote another one called The Vault Between Spaces that's also so creative and strange and fun and unexpected. And then my friend Michelle Greep writes these amazing sort of gothic historical set in England, um, rich stories. Her settings, you smell them, you taste them, and
Oh, so cool.
she's so gifted. So I love her work. And oh, it's always hard because I admire so many writers, but those are two that come to the top of my mind that I've read recently. So
Yeah, I love it. And then I also wanted to mention, we're doing a giveaway over on my blog. So if you just go to trishagoyer.com/blog, you'll see it's right there, and there's a giveaway. And I always interview and ask questions. And now you mentioned, like I always say, we love interesting facts. One more, in fact, you're like, I love mashed potatoes. And then later in the interview, you mentioned mashed potatoes. So I had a totally different plan for dinner tonight. And when I was reading through your interview again, I could not get mashed potatoes out of my mind. I was going to do this pork dish with rice. We had instead pork roast with mashed potatoes and Brussels sprouts tonight because I'm like, I need mashed potatoes. And it was from that interview you mentioned it. I'm like, that sounds so good. So we just ate it for dinner just a little bit ago.
we had mashed potatoes for lunch today. And it wasn't even because I was thinking about the interview. That's like my favorite comfort food, mashed potatoes and gravy. I made chicken in the crock pot with gravy and then
Yes, we had
mashed potatoes.
gravy. I did some sautéed mushrooms on the side because not all my family likes mushrooms, so I can't put them in the gravy, but we had them on the side. It was so good. I'm like, I'm so glad she mentioned that today or in the interview because that was so delicious. So you'll never know what you'll find when you interview an author. All of a sudden, you're craving mashed potatoes. So thank you. My whole family thanks you for that dinner tonight.
Glad to be of service.
Yeah. All right. So for those who are like, yes, I want Dream of Kings. I want to look at her other books. I'm ready to dig in. Where can they find more information about you and your books?
You can just pop over to my website, SharonHinck.com, and I have all kinds of fun things to explore. If you get excited about one of the series or another, there's some extra bonus things all over the website. So
Mhm.
dig in, have fun. You can also get my books wherever books are sold. Amazon, Enclave is the publisher, and they have them at their site. And Christian Book Distributors is another good spot to go to, or your local bookstore is always a good place to support.
Yes. And I love local bookstores are excellent because it's always supporting those independent bookstores. And also, I always say, ask your library to order them.
Yes,
Because then not only do you get to enjoy it, but other people that visit the library get to enjoy it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Were you one of those kids that would go to the library and come home with a stack this big?
Yes.
Me too.
Yes. And I actually, and that's how I didn't grow up in a home that read a lot of books, but we lived near a library, and that's how I totally got into it. Once, I'm just going to tell this real quick. I
Yep.
was coming home. I had books, bags of books on my handlebars, and I was going down a hill, and I was probably fifth grade. The books must have weighed more than me because I flipped over the bike because the front was so heavy going down the hill. So reading can be dangerous. But yeah, I was that kid. And look at our, like, we are
Look at our backgrounds.
exactly.
We are book people.
These are real, and this is only just one of my shelves in my
Yeah.
house. Yeah. So we love it. Oh, it's which I'm just enjoying reading your book so much. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's so good to hear.
Yeah.
I always feel like writing is a conversation. Like, we tell the
Mhm.
story and then we wait to see, do people engage with it? Does it mean something to them? Is there something they like about it? On various levels. Is it, the literary level? Do you like the turn of phrase? Do you like the poetic
Yeah.
imagery? On the spiritual level, does it grab you by the heart and squeeze,
Yes.
And so anyway, it's always so good to hear. It's such a relief when the book is actually out in the wild now and people can respond to it, because that's when it starts
Absolutely.
to feel.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Patrice, for capturing my quote, reading can be dangerous. Yeah, I agree with you, Sharon. That's the fun part when books come out to get that response because I turned in a book Monday, and I'm like wanted to already message them. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to hear how wonderful you think my book is. It was only 2 days ago. I'm sure they have not had time to even look at it. But it's like, come on, I want to hear. How's it
Yes,
going?
yes, and I need to hear. I
I
need
need to hear.
need that reassurance that, well, I don't know, do you feel as you're writing that it's flowing and it's strong and you can like objectively look at it and say, "Hey, this is pretty good." Or are you like me? Because I always think this is just awful. And
I go through stages because I'm
Mhm.
like, "Oh, this is really great. Oh, no, this is not gonna come together. Oh, wait, I think it's gonna work out. I don't know. I'm not sure." So, you
Yeah.
always love, and then I always by the time I turn in, I'm like, "Okay, this is pretty good." I'm ready for them to say,
Mhm.
like, "You did a good job." And then I get the editorial letter, it's like, "You need to fix this," and I kinda get grumpy. I'm like, "What do you mean
Oh,
I need to fix that?"
I
Like,
give myself 24 hours to kick things and stomp around the house saying, "They don't get it." And then by the next day, I look at it again and I go, "Oh, they have a point.
yeah,
Oh, they're pretty smart." And then I start fixing, and then
and
it's
then
fun.
when I start fixing it, I'm like, oh, this makes it so much better. Oh,
Yeah.
this is so good." Yeah. So,
I actually love the editorial process, but I
yeah,
do give myself 24 hours to be grumpy. I
I
think
know.
that's fair.
Yeah, I think that I like the 24-hour thing because 'cause I'm like, "Ah, what do they mean? What do they mean we need to fix the beginning, blah, blah," and they're like then I'm like, "Okay, yeah, yeah, they're right." Oh, well, thank you so much for being here today. This was great, and
Thanks for
hopefully I'll get to see you in
listening.
person next year at a conference sometime or something. That would be awesome.
It was so fun. I think it was just like a year and a few months ago that I
Yeah,
saw you at Realm Makers. It was so fun to see you and hear what's going on with you, and this is a fun time to catch up too, and I'm
yeah.
so glad you're enjoying Dream of Kings.
I
Yay!
am. I can't wait to get back into it. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.